evening's event. This is something that started in the idea came from a rental car in West Allis, Wisconsin, as Adrienne and I were lecturing at the Henry Schein's Dental Business Institute. And we're saying, boy, wouldn't it be great to do a risk management and protection special event, a three-way trifecta. Let's fly out, let's get a big, let's do multiple different locations throughout North America. Let's fly out, let's have, lots of lights and excitement. And then COVID hit. But that was the whole premise. What if we had a perfect trifecta of risks with the lease, right? Risks with HR, as well as certainly risk as it pertains to the embezzlement or control of the cash. So again, I could not be more excited about this evening, ladies and gentlemen. We have some incredible speakers with us. To start off, the first section of this evening will be Adrienne Twigg, co-owner of Bent Ericksen and Associates. You're in for a real treat with her because I've yet to meet a dentist that loves the HR side of the business. It's usually the one component that everyone seems to just push to the side or hope it gets done. And usually the thing that each and every year is not top of everyone's list. So Adrienne comes from working and managing a large dental group for over 17 years. So she knows the pains of the day-to-day, as well as the importance of having the HR and employment compliance specialist. So obviously state by state is very, very different throughout. But really looking forward to Adrienne's sections talking about now in a post-COVID world, how important is it to make sure that all the employment agreements and documentation is correct. Similar to the leasing world, as things happened this time last year and everyone laid off their staff, as they were looking for their lease, because they're required to pay the payment, also looking through who has employment agreements, what's the status of that, and what do we do with our staff. So Adrienne will be up first this evening, followed by myself. And then last but not least, David Harris. David Harris, as you saw from his bio, he has more letters behind his name than some of our clients as a CFE, CPA, CMA, CFF, and MBA. And for those of you that have ever gone to David's courses and seen some of his forensic accounting interviews and or cross-examinations, they're pretty incredible. So certainly we're up for a great treat this evening with David really digging into what are the key things to look for in terms of embezzlement, in terms for really managing the key best practices that especially in a remote and now into these unique times, how do we help to make sure we're protecting ourselves and some of the new tricks that unfortunately some people are doing to their owners, the dentist, in their practices. So David, as he says, has one of the coolest jobs in the industry. He chases, catches, and those who steal from dentists. Again, you're working hard every single day. You're chairside. The last thing you need to be worried about is, right, money flying out underneath your nose, especially based on all the risk and hard work that you're doing every single day. So Prosperident is one of the world's largest firms investigating financial crimes committed against dentists. And then in addition to being a licensed private investigator and a forensic certified public accountant and a certified fraud examiner, David's a frequent presenter, and we've, again, had a lot of good co-presentings over the years. So really looking forward to a fantastic this evening, specifically on dental practice, risk management, and protection. Perfect. On that note, just before we pass it to Adrienne, now that we've got a lot more people logged in, we'll pull up a quick poll. So just to get a sense of the room, as well as to help align and customize some of the content this evening, this is a quick poll that we'll be able to share just in terms of, and again, it won't show the individual results, just the aggregates. But again, number one, have you or another dentist you know been an embezzlement victim? Yes or no? Number two, based on the impact of COVID-19 on vacancies, do you believe you have more leverage in your dental office lease negotiation? Yes or no? Number three, do you feel that your rent payment is at or above current market price? And of course, if you've looked in your neighborhood and you've seen more than 5 or 6 vacancy signs on the way to the office, that is a high likelihood you may be. Number four, do you properly pay overtime to all non-exempt employees, including office managers and hygienists? regardless if they're paid hourly or salary when they work for more than 40 hours per week, yes or no? Right. And next, do you know the currently recommended procedure to follow if a pregnant employee says she cannot or will not take x-rays and or work with nitrous oxide? Yes, no. So these are just some thought-provoking questions to get us going. Feel free to fill those out. We'll give that another 30 seconds. And then lastly, today, myself as the president of Cirrus Consulting Group, the firm specifically, for those of you that haven't joined one of our events in the past, our firm is the only healthcare specialized tenant representation firm of our kind in North America. We are the de facto experts in dental office lease negotiations. Through our 27-year tenure, we've done over 12,000 successful lease negotiations. And we're going to be touching on a lot of the topics as it pertains to, even if you own your dental office building, or if you're also in the stage where you are coming up for renewal of your lease or looking to buy, expand, renovate, etc., is a perfect opportunity. All right, on that note, interesting. So just looking at some initial poll results, a good portion hadn't responded, but interesting. So roughly now a little over half have been or know of a doctor who's been an embezzlement victim. So if you don't yet, you might not, but I'm sure after asking the right questions will be great from David's perspective. Number two, no, based on, do you believe you have more leverage in the dental office lease negotiation? So that's very interesting. So 3/4 of you said no, that feeling that there isn't more leverage. And that's a big misconception that we'll touch on because of the fact of the increase in vacancies, and that really the dental office is pandemic proof, if you will, meaning that in comparison to a lot of the retail or in certain areas of the continent right now are still in lockdown. Certainly there's a lot of advantage being that dental office tenant. Do you feel that your rents are at or above market price? So interesting, a little over 63% were at or above market price. Vast majority paying overtime based on non-exempt employees. And then number 5, roughly 63% now. Again, no, the recommended procedure, and 37% don't. So great. So lots of opportunity now to jump into those. On that note, over to the one and the only Adrienne Twigg to kick us off.
Thank you, Eric. It's a privilege to be here with you guys and with David, sharing the time that we have together. I'm very interested in hearing both David's presentation and yours. I think we can always learn, and I'm very much looking forward to it. So as we move through, we're going to talk a little bit about what you are facing now in your dental practices with the recruiting and hiring challenges that you're going with. And boy, I don't have to tell you how challenging it is right now finding staff and filling those positions. And there's a whole lot of different reasons for it. A lot of dental team members out there have just chosen to throw in the towel, and they're retiring. You know, they think, okay, I'm done. This is it. I'm going to retire and move on. There's been a lot of people that have just chosen to go to a new career path. They think that there is a risk in going back into a dental office environment. And you guys know as well as I do, dental offices are one of the safest places to be. You've operated under OSHA guidelines for years and years and years. You've got sterilization techniques, sanitization techniques set up, and it is one of the safest places to be. But some people have chosen to go down a different path. You have a ton of folks out there now that are having to stay home because of childcare issues. Maybe they have kids that they have to homeschool now. Maybe they have a loved one that they're having to take care of and be at home for. So, you know, you throw that in the mix. Some people are just afraid, and they're afraid to jump back in to the dental office environment right now because of the risks and all of the information and disinformation that's out there. Or maybe they're getting unemployment, and let's be frank, maybe their unemployment check is as much or more than they're making right now. So they're thinking, I don't have to pay childcare, I'm staying at home. That's another reason. There's been a lot of the vocational schools that have shut down for a period of time, whether it's the assisting classes or hygiene schools that have closed and they just haven't opened yet. And as a consequence, they are graduating fewer and fewer students along the way. Some of those students that were ready to take their exams and get their licensure and launch out into their careers, they've had to put them on hold because they're not doing those exams right now because of the postponing of classes and that type of thing. So there is a smaller number of candidates out there for you to choose from. So you know what? It's kind of a short game versus a long game in what we're dealing with. The short game is, look, you are doing whatever you can do to fill those openings and to survive, to keep your practice not just surviving, but thriving. The long game is, let's focus on the team that we have and develop those employees and those team members into quality employees if they're not there yet, so that they're long term, showing appreciation for the people that you have and creating the culture in your office that is really going to support retention of those employees along the way. So we're all about good hiring practices. And, as long as you have good hiring practices in place, that really does increase your success of hanging on to those good employees that you have, and then attracting the quality employees that you need to fill those slots. So having a good hiring practice in place is really going to help you as the practice owner identify and attract those quality applicants that are there along the way. I believe that if we were sitting in a room and I asked you to raise your hand on how many of you enjoyed going through the recruiting and the screening and the hiring process, I'm not sure that we would have too many hands being raised. I know when I was managing an office, it was the bane of my existence to have to go through interviewing. Thank goodness we didn't have to do it very often. We had a great team, but that was not my favorite thing to do. Having your hiring practices in place and down pat is really going to decrease your training costs. And folks, you know as well as I do, training costs and that overhead goes directly to your bottom line. It goes directly to your bottom line because when you have to train people, you take a nick to your production and your collection, no matter how good you are. It's just a fact. Decreasing your turnover. Turnover is the Achilles heel of a dental practice. You get a team together, they're gelling, everybody's trained on the technology and the equipment that you have. When somebody leaves, either voluntarily or involuntarily, you feel like sometimes you're starting over. You're creating that chemistry again with your team. You're having to train on the basic things again. And that really does put a tug on your bottom line. Having good hiring practices and your team in place helps you reduce those areas that maybe things are out of bounds, helping you stay in bounds and out of trouble with the labor board and things that come along with that. Bottom line, having a good hiring practice, getting your team in place really does improve patient relations. And that's what your practice is built on. Patient relations, how much your patients appreciate you, trust you to take care of them and their families. John Boudreau said a long time ago that selecting qualified employees was like putting money in the bank. There again, going to your bottom line. Lee Iacocca, for those of you old enough, such as myself, to know who Lee Iacocca was with the Chrysler Corporation, said, start with good people, lay out the rules, communicate with your employees, motivate them, reward them. And if you do all those things effectively, you can't miss. That goes along right with your hiring practices. The biggest hiring mistake that we see out there right now is that people are hiring based on skills, perceived skills, or the experience that they believe that this candidate has. That is the number one hiring mistake. Instead, you should be looking for the things that you can't teach, you can't train. You can't teach someone to have a good attitude. They either do or they don't. You can't teach someone to come in and be motivated and seize the day. They either have that or they don't. You need to look at your organizational culture and see if this person is going to be a fit for you. So the phases that you have of hiring and recruiting and all that are pretty simple. You have to define the job. You have to go through the recruiting process and the screening and the wonderful interview process. Skills assessments. We're going to talk a little bit about the working interview or the skills assessment along the way. Hopefully you're using some type of a job match selection tool to make sure that this person has the emotional intelligence that you're looking for to fill this position, has the adaptability to be able to get along with your team, your patients, and you as the business owner. And then by all means, and I know that David probably will touch it on this at some point, is your reference checks. If you get nothing else out of my little presentation right now, please remember, do your due diligence and check those references. Make sure that you're calling and that you get the appropriate people on the phone to ask the questions about the references that those candidates give you along the way. So number one, define the job. We are big proponents of using job descriptions. There's a lot of different areas that job descriptions come into play. One of them is, of course, keep it up to date and keep it accurate. One of the areas that you need to concentrate on with your job descriptions is making sure that they are compliant with the ADA. For this instance, we're not talking American Dental Association, we are talking Americans with Disabilities Act. Making sure that on your job description, you have things built in that make that job description compliant. Make sure that all the essential functions are outlined so that when people look at those job descriptions, they know exactly what is expected of them. This is an example of one of our job descriptions. It's for a dental assistant. I know that the type on this is really small, but look at the purple box, making sure that you have things identified, like who does this person report to? What are the qualifications and the duties that this person will be responsible for? Any education and experience that you're looking for, and any licensure certifications that this person needs to have is going to be critical as explained on your job description. And the physical and the environmental requirements get into the ADA section of it. On our job descriptions, we have some behavioral and attitudinal things listed there, such as they need to engender trust with you as the owner, the business owner, and the practice owner there. They need to be able to accept constructive criticism. They need to be able to get along with their coworkers. You know, we have people that call us sometimes and will say, oh, my dental assistant, her radiographs are fine and, you know, she does okay, but boy, her attitude has just gone south, but there's nothing I can do about it, right? Well, not so. If you have things like that in your job description from day one, that's something that they have to adhere to. I love this line in our job description because as a manager, I never wanted to have a team member come to me if they were asked to do something and say, oof, not my job, I'm not doing that. We have a line in our job descriptions that says additional or different duties may be assigned occasionally at the employer's discretion. That kind of covers the teamwork aspect of what you're expecting out of these candidates and out of these people that you're interviewing. The whole purpose behind job description is, number one, if you're ever called into question about how you treated an employee or what went on, that job description goes as a benchmark for you to say, this is what I expected, this didn't happen. So the consequences were that you terminated that employee. It really helps legally defend you and the actions that you take. Of course, it's going to help you write any ads that you have to do if you're looking for candidates. It's going to put it out there what is expected of that job. It's going to help you in interview questions because these are the functions that are involved in that. Making sure that whoever you're talking to as a candidate totally understands what is expected of them. So let's talk a little bit about the recruiting. We're all scrambling. You're, shaking the trees, beating the bushes to see who you can find out there to fill these positions that you have. You've got available sources to you, internal versus external. Some of the internal mechanisms that you may use is maybe you have employees right now that are stellar. If you could just clone them, you would be one happy camper. Ask them, do you have people that you know, like yourself, that would be a good fit for this office? Maybe you have employees that have moved out of the area, or maybe they're at home now with children, that they have friends that they might think would be a good fit. Or if you have a patient that is like a wonderful patient and everybody is just so excited when they see that patient name on the schedule, you could ask them if perhaps you're thinking, oh, I would love to have that patient work for me, but you don't want to put them on the spot. So maybe you say, Mrs. Smith, we really love it when you come in our office. You're just like one of our A-grade patients. Do you know of anyone like yourself that might be interested in this position here in our practice? Perhaps that patient will say, well, Dr. Johnson, I've kind of been thinking about going to work. What's the position? And maybe they would be a good candidate for you without putting them on the spot. Then you have that information. Of course, Craigslist is still out there as a viable option. Indeed.com, ZipRecruiter. We've had really good success with those as being a bulletin board, an avenue for you to post job listings. We have a colleague that has a company called Dental Post that I would be happy to give you contact information for her if you're looking. They do a great job at giving resumes and introducing applicants to companies. Another one is your dental supply company. Your rep goes into a ton of offices and they always are talking to people in the offices. So maybe there's somebody that's looking for a change that they can kind of connect you to. There's always the professional associations that are still there, whether it's the Dental Association in your area, the Dental Society. Those are always good places to keep mining candidate information from. One of the things about the screening process that we think is really important is that it's really a process of elimination. Sometimes we get so wrapped up in looking at the resumes and thinking, oh, okay, well, this looks good. They have a pulse or they have this or that. So I'm going to hold this resume out. We really think it should be a process of elimination. Go through and immediately pull out people that you have questions about or that doesn't feel right for some reason or the other. Instead of trying to fit that square peg in a round hole, go through and eliminate the resumes as you go along, making sure that you're looking at the resumes for things like typographical errors, grammatical errors, things that you can say, yeah, that doesn't look like it would be a fit. Phone interviews, especially now with pandemic and post-pandemic, are still a big thing. We say set up a phone interview that only takes 2 or 3 minutes. It's not going to be a whole long process. It's just for a couple of minutes. In that phone interview process, you're hearing their voice. How do they sound on the phone? Is it like nails on a chalkboard, or is it pleasing? Is it somebody that you would want to be dealing with the public on your behalf? Once again, during that phone interview, set up a time for them to come into the office to pick up the application. I know a lot of people have an application available online, but have it come into the office. You get to see how they present themselves. Are they on time? Maybe have them sit and wait for you for a couple of minutes. And then you, as the doctor, go out, introduce yourself and say, thank you for picking up this application. Here you go. You get kind of an impression overall first time through. And then you go to screen and set up something more formal. During the interview process, you get to see if you feel like if it's gonna be a fit, if they have the right attitude that you need to work with your team. By all means, make sure that you review the application and their information, and then set up so that you have a couple of times that you're meeting with this person, whether one time in the morning and maybe one time in the afternoon with multiple people. I know it's been a question. A lot of our orthodontic clients are saying, I really want somebody that's got a great smile. How do I do that if everybody's wearing masks? Well, maybe you have a couple of your team members or yourself take the applicant to lunch. They have to take the mask off to eat, right? So that gives you an opportunity multiple times with multiple people to talk to the person and just get a feel for what their personality is like. A rule of thumb that you need to be operating by is you're only talking 20% of the time. The candidate is talking 80% of the time. Look for the nonverbal cues. Are they really uncomfortable? Are they very closed in their body language? You can pick up on those things really easy. As you're talking to the candidate, it's really important that you take notes. You think, oh, I'm going to remember this person. But if you're interviewing several people, things are going to run together. You're not going to remember who said what and what your impression was. By all means, have a set of questions that you're asking each person. The same set of questions, making sure that those questions are legal and then it's not going to get you into trouble. Don't be asking how old they are. Don't be asking if they have children or how old their children are, things like that. Don't ask if they own their own house or their car. There are things that you should definitely stay away from. So know what those legal questions are. And don't ask the yes or no questions. You want the applicant to tell you about themselves, to have open-ended questions so that you are learning about them. The categories of questions are 4 main topics, really. It's about their technical skills, their credentials, their experience, where they've worked, what they've done, their opinion. A lot of times we ask opinion-based questions, but behavioral questions is really what you want to focus on. The old technique was we really used to focus on the opinion-based questions like, how would you handle if an angry patient was at the front desk? Well, nowadays it's more focused on, tell me of a time where you dealt with an angry patient. What did you do? What was the result of that? The underlying theory with all of these questions is that past behavior is really the best predictor of future behavior and how they do handle things, how they adjust under stress and under different situations. So all of these questions are really designed to get from the applicant how they've behaved in past situations. So if we're talking about some of those situations, what are we talking about? Well, like I said, ask them, describe for me a situation where you have, so that they can give you an example of things that they have dealt with in the past and how they've handled it. So really quickly, we're going to touch on the working interview and what that is. Well, the Fair Labor Standards Act has a very strict requirement for skills assessment and working interviews. So in this, the candidate is not permitted to work for you. They cannot do any productive work. They can't volunteer. They can't come in and say, oh yes, if it's a hygienist, yeah, I'll clean that patient's teeth for you and you can see my skill level. You can't do that without paying them. They can't do any productive work. So if it is a hygienist and you're thinking, well, how in the world am I going to figure out what their skill level is? Have them work on you. You be the patient. That's not productive work. And if you say, well, what if I'm interviewing several different hygienists? You're going to have really clean teeth. If it's a dental assistant, maybe have them tell you how they would set up a tray so that they're not actually working on a patient. They can shadow you, but they can't do any productive work. You can't have them there more than 2 hours without paying them. And there can't be any compensation if it's a skills assessment. We recommend, if you're going to have somebody in there to do a skills assessment stint with you, that you document it. We're big proponents on documentation. You have a signed form so that you outline there's not going to be any wages. You're not promising them a job, and that they sign off on that. So there isn't any questions later about what you promised them or that they expected any type of compensation for that. And just know, if you bring someone in and they work for you during a skills assessment and you're paying them, if they get hurt on the job, if they have a needle stick, your workers' comp is going to come into play with that because they are your employee, even if it's for 3 hours or 4 hours for half of a day. So just be aware of that as you're scheduling these skills assessments. So the recruiting phases, defining the job, doing the recruiting and screening, the interview process, all of this goes into what you are handling right now. We have a risk analysis quiz that I am more than happy to send you to kind of see where you are in the process of how you're handling things as far as the labor board and all of that goes. Eric will give you information on how to get in touch with us. So that's kind of where we are with the situation now. We're here to answer questions and to help you as best we can with all of this. So I'm going to turn it back to Eric and David. If you have questions, if I can answer anything, or if you have anything to add. You guys have a lot of experience with dealing with staff and things that are going on in the office. So David, what do you think? Is there anything about background checks or reference checks that you want to cover?
Absolutely. And it's almost like we planned this, Adrienne, because I have a slide on that, and I'll give the other side of the coin. I mean, you've told people how to get the right people, and I'm going to talk about how not to get the wrong ones.
Perfect.
So I'll have to keep you in suspense for a little while longer on that.
I can't wait. Can't wait. So Eric, I'm going to stop sharing my screen and turn it back to you at this point.
Perfect. Thank you, Adrienne. My one point is, again, for the doctors online today that might have an older employment agreement or an older policy guide and just haven't got around to it, or let's say even perhaps an old employee that is grandfathered in, if you will, or has been there for forever and doesn't have an agreement. What would you suggest in terms of guidance for those type of situations where it's just not been a top priority, it's years old, it hasn't been updated, or potentially doesn't exist at all?
Yeah, well, the first thing they have to do is make sure that they get a policy manual in place. Things are so critical right now. And right now, a dentist is more likely to be sued for a labor-related issue than they are for malpractice. Labor insurance now is outpricing malpractice, so that lets you know that it's being used. Getting a policy manual in place that's specific to whatever state that you're practicing in and the number of employees, because the employee threshold has a lot to do with the policies that go in. And people think, oh, well, my staff love me, I don't ever have to worry about that. Well, I think, as David will talk about, the embezzlement issue with your most trusted, loyal staff, you can't depend on that. You need to protect the biggest asset that you have, and that is your practice. So it is critical that you have your ducks in a row, your T's crossed, and your I's dotted.
Got it.
Let me add one thing, if I could.
Please.
One of my frustrations is that we get called in sometimes to deal with issues of payroll fraud. So you have a staff member who's preparing the payroll, and they kind of have their hand in the cookie jar, and they're taking more than they should. And the first question that we ask the doctor, and most times the answer we get is unsatisfactory, is can you establish for me objectively how much they should get paid? In other words, do you have some kind of agreement with them that talks about their compensation?
Yeah.
And if you don't, it's very hard to prove that they took more money than they should have when you can't establish what should have happened.
Great point.
So you mentioned job description. I agree wholeheartedly. I think in terms of documentation, you need to go further. And the employee handbook is an important part because you can set out some general parameters of things like overtime then. But I really want to know if this employee is supposed to be paid $32 an hour or not.
Yeah. Yeah, we have, as part of our package, the service that we provide, we do have employee agreements that does exactly what you said, David, spell out what the compensation is, what the hours should be, the job description or the job position title and all of that. So that is, and it's an acknowledgement form that's part of the onboarding process, which is key. That you have those documents signed, acknowledgement forms, that they've read the policy manual, that they've received their job description, and that they have an employment agreement. Absolutely.
I think a lot of employers are scared of employment agreements and not really for good reason.
No, I think that they believe that it's going to tie their hands. And when it absolutely does the opposite, it puts them on really solid ground with what's been talked about, compensation, what's been promised, none of these verbal agreements that he said, she said that the employer will lose every time. So yeah, the documentation, like I said, we are big proponents of documentation, and you get that employee signature very first thing when you're onboarding them so that there is no misunderstanding anywhere down the line.
Fantastic. Just as a as another core point is the Q&A section. So the note section is turned off. The Q&A section is there. There's already some great questions here about state and federal programs covering COVID, sick pay, people that are out for multiple weeks. So we're going to include a full section at the end for Q&A and stay on as long as people have some core key questions. So in the essence of time, we're going to keep rolling, but keep those questions coming in, and we'll make sure to cover them all or follow up shortly thereafter. All right, so if everybody can see my screen, one of the Zoomisms 101 for 2021. So really today is all about risk as it pertains to the dental office lease. And even those that might own their own building, right? The lease, and arguably with the impact of COVID, has really caused a lot of doctors to realize that it's just as important for the building they own to a building that they're a tenant of. So really the focus here today is to help address some of those concerns. Very, very interesting that the vast majority of you felt in the original poll that you didn't have as much leverage, because in my opinion, it's the opposite. Now, there's exit and use cases, and there's ways of how the landlords are approaching you, but it is, in my opinion, an incredible time to be a dental tenant. Just ask yourself on the drive to work this morning or the drive home this evening, how many for lease signs did you see? Right? And therefore, right, what do you think those landlords are feeling, especially those mom and pops that spread themselves very thin? So a couple of core numbers here to start us off with. 85% of dentists have leases that can prevent them from ever selling their practice. Is that a risk? Absolutely. In many cases, the assignment clause is one of the core conditions of sale, the successful assignment of that lease to the new buyer, thereby giving the control or a lot of control in the hands of the landlord to potentially say no or potentially even terminate the lease just for asking to sell the practice. Number two, and this for all the people that filled out the original poll, 54% of dentists across North America are overpaying in rent for their practice today. So if you think you don't have leverage, right, you're probably overpaying today. So please, from this point forward, realize that you are, in my opinion, God's gift to the landlord. You have the lowest default rate at less than 0.5%. You, on average, have the highest build-out costs, $150 to $200 per square foot, which instantly becomes an asset of the landlords for all those tenant improvement allowances and those leasehold improvements. right? And also typically the dental practice is in the same location for 26.5 years. So therefore, again, put yourselves in the landlord's shoes. You are a fantastic tenant, regardless of what the landlord may say. Oh, I've got a dozen other dentists that'll take this over tomorrow, right? You definitely have leverage. And last but not least, in terms of risk, and this we've seen some heartbreaking examples of, right? 80% of landlords today structure their lease to allow them to at least 50% of your proceeds when you go to sell your practice. That is found, for those of you following along in your lease, that is found in the assignment and subletting section, typically of your lease, right? And that is the consideration language. So we'll jump into that as well. So in essence, we're going to break these 3 sections down. I see them already flying through mine. Really, what I wanted to do today was, first of all, say that you're not alone. You've got 3 great resources on the screen today to help you through some of the most challenging and frustrating situations, dealing with employees, dealing with your landlords, right? And or dealing with very troubled employees, shall we say. So we're going to go through some of the main risks as well as some of the main financial negotiables. Last year was the busiest year in our company's 27-year history. We're very unique, being a healthcare and dental specialized firm. That's it. That's all we do, right? We are founded by dentists for dentists now. Again, back in 1994, we've done over 12,000 of these. And proud to report that we've got over 200 dental client reviews and now have achieved the Perfect 5.0. So again, really focused on helping to demystify the whole dental office lease negotiation process and how our team, which comprises of some that have been negotiating leases now with us for over 18 years, we've got multiple commercial real estate attorneys on staff, plus and a great individual that had worked for the landlord that had previously negotiated against tenants, dentists, etc. Right? And now we've brought her on from the dark side, right, to help really and represent the tenant. A couple of key points for here. We're going to look at some analytics and some software that we have, proprietary software that we have that looks at some of the commercial real estate data throughout Canada and the US. So obviously these are estimates and forecasts. But interesting. So across the board, as it pertains to the macroeconomic functions that are impacting supply and demand, and therefore rates for your dental office lease, are these. So look at this, 2016, 2017, in terms of the national market rental growth year over year, right? Large increases year over year in terms of 2018, 2019, right? And then into the negatives into 2020, into 2021. So again, what does that mean for us? That if your lease has been going up by 3, 4, 5% every single year, or perhaps tied to CPI, as you go into your next renewal negotiations, right, it might be a great opportunity to reset that rent. No different than doctors at San Francisco or otherwise that negotiated in 2008 were able to take advantage of those supply and demand issues and were able to get incredible lease rates. And some of them were paying half of what their neighbors were 5 or 10 years later. Also, for the national availability rate, right, no shortage of vacancies increasing across the board. And therefore, we want to be cognizant of that. And from that perspective, to be aware of what is going on in your specific area. National leasing activity, no surprise, was down throughout the country last year. About 300 million square feet leased, right? And obviously the first bit of 2021 is still showing less lease activity, typically more demand, more businesses changing, going under, closing their doors, etc. So let's dig in a little bit further. And from those of you curious about your rent and rental rates and looking at for your area and following along, feel free to email us at info@cirrusconsultinggroup.com. We can pull up this similar graph for your particular area and do that analysis of your lease to look for those components. But pretty interesting, right? Market rents continually going up year over year over year over year over year, right? Vacancy rates, right, also then increasing. But look, 2020, right, pulled the emergency brake a little bit. Vacancies increased at a slightly higher rate. Rental rates started to come down. So from that perspective, important to recognize those supply and the demand factors. When looking through here as well, vacancy rates versus market rates per square foot. In Canada, a little different, but big cyclical curves on vacancies, right? That got down dramatically, now coming back up. So most importantly, get the data. here's some of the examples of a building that we can see in some cases what other tenants are paying. We could potentially see when the last leasing activity was. And on the right-hand side, I know it's small to see, but some of the specific market activity down 34%. On average in this market, if you were to leave, on average, it would take the landlord 13.3 months to fill that space. So again, if you're curious, hey, where does my lease fall? And what does that mean for me? There'll be the option to request that lease review. Or if you're eager and sitting there flipping through your digital copy of your lease or looking for it feverishly in your email, you can email that to info@Cirrus Consulting Group. But we have access now to 95 billion square foot of data throughout the continent, 4.6 million properties tracked, and we've, again, have incredible access to data, availability reports, etc., which is a big theme. How do you reduce risk? You reduce the risk by having the data, by having the contracts, as Adrienne said, in place, by having everything rock solid to make sure that you're protected if and when things may go wrong. Okay, just at a very, very high level, this, one of the main components when thinking about are the 7 main financial negotiables in your new lease. And this can also be applicable for your existing lease. So for those of you that are a mid-career doctor that says, oh, well, I guess I'm just going to exercise my next option. No, stop. You have leverage. It might be far better off to hit the reset button and to say, look, Mr. Landlord, I'm contemplating my long-term options. I'm contemplating where I want to be for the foreseeable future. And, COVID has caused me to rethink a lot of components about the long-term plans for my business. So, right, Mr. Landlord, I'd like to propose a new 10-year term, right, with 2 5-year options and treat it as if you're a new tenant. Right? Imagine that landlord that's getting phone calls all day, every day from tenants that are behind on rent or struggling or looking for deals versus you dangling as a successful dental tenant with good high quality foot traffic to come in to dangle a check, right? And for many cases of you, a multi-million-dollar check in terms of a long-term lease with options. So please, you have leverage. You want to certainly protect yourself, not just base rent, but annual increases. Even a 0.5% rent reduction could be savings of tens, if not hundreds of thousands of dollars over the next short term or career. CAM fees. A lot of doctors recently, landlords, due to a variety of reasons, right, increased the CAM, the common area maintenance, taxes, maintenance, insurance. And some of that represented up to a third, in some cases, almost a half of rental rates. Some other components here is a fixturing. So for those of you building out the practice, we've been successful in adding some COVID type language. So through the build out, if it's not delivered by such and such a date, that gives you an exit. So you're not beholden to a landlord that may be, a pre-construction or developer, and they just keep moving the goalposts on you. So there's a number of ways that we've been able to do that. But fixturing is the point from possession to commencement. So that by the time you get the keys to the time that the lease starts ticking, right, you should not have to be responsible for base rent. So that could be 1 month, 2 months, 3 months. In some cases, we've seen up to 6. So it depends on the situation. And again, how you're approaching the negotiation. And then afterwards, free rent, not just tacked on by a broker for the last 3 months at the end to increase commissions. No, to really focus on free rent. Month 1, right, of 120, month 2, month 3, as a great opportunity to maximize your cash flow, especially as you're opening or renovating or making significant changes to your space. Another interesting component is tenant improvement allowance, which can be seen as a bit of fool's gold. It sounds great. It looks great. The landlord's great. David's going to give me $40 per square foot. However, it's not free money, and you may be far better off financially to take 0 or less tenant improvement allowance in exchange for one of the other 7 variables, reducing base rent. Again, when looking at the total compounding cost of tenancy over the next 5, 10, 15, 20 years, the savings could be astronomical. And then also landlord work. What are they willing to do to help ensure that it avoids the whoops or surprises as you come through? Let that be with your new negotiation or with renewal. paint. We just finished the lease not long ago for the dentist for the San Francisco Giants. And just for a simple renewal, we were able to get new flooring and new paint, HVAC systems in other cases, lots of opportunities there. So to summarize, a couple of core components to maximize leverage, which also means minimizing risk. Remember, the lease that you signed, if you didn't have professional representation, or if you felt you didn't get many wins in your last negotiation, it's probably because that's true. The landlord has spent lots of money to design a 30, 40, 50, 60, 70 page agreement to be all in the landlord's favor. Yet a lot of the different corporations, of course, they've got a team of lawyers and they're negotiating hard with the landlord to make lots of amendments. Just because you are an individual practitioner doesn't mean that you shouldn't have the same economies of scale or benefit from that. And that's exactly where we fit in. So you are an incredible tenant, right? Remember that, because all too often doctors feel because of their high profitability, they say, oh, well, I guess I'm just going to have to keep paying. Oh, rental rates up by 20%. Oh, that's terrible, but what am I going to do, right? Don't let yourself fall into that path. Again, for those of you joining, feel free to add questions as we go. I'll make sure to get to those. Do the math, as I said before. Plan, prepare, and prioritize, the 3 Ps, meaning that plan in advance, typically 2, and in some cases now, even maybe 3 years in advance of your expiry is the best time to start the negotiation process. Also, be aware and prepare. The 2 things to put in your phone right now, in addition to my 2 kids' birthdays, is to ensure that you've put in your lease expiry date, and number 2, put in your option to renew deadline date. If, for whatever reason, you miss that, it's 3 months, 6 months, 12 months in advance, if you miss that date, that means that your remaining options to stay in that space become null and void, and your right to stay after your expiry date has now lapsed. And therefore, that could put you out on the streets, and that could be a significant amount of concern. And then also, as you start, even before you pick up the phone with the landlord, have it professionally reviewed, your lease, and start to identify what are your top priorities, what are your must-haves, what are your nice-to-haves, and what are things that you're willing to concede on through the process of negotiations to help maximize your end result, because it's all a give and take. And then the last one is one of the best strategies I can share post-COVID, during COVID, however you want to look at it, is having your cake and eat it too. And we've seen some tremendous examples of this. A doctor in Boston recently, you can see her 5-star Google review. She hired us just to do a simple renewal. In the end, she said, you know what, I just want to keep my landlord honest. And we put the fishing pole in the water and sent out a letter of intent for an office down the street. And as a result, we were able to secure almost $200,000 of tenant improvement allowance that landlord was just jumping through hoops in order to entice that dentist to come to their new location. So what turned into just being a simple renewal, just to keep the landlord honest, it was then to see what would a landlord be willing to do to potentially bring in my business. And for those of you with relocation or demolition rights in your lease, or termination clauses on behalf of the landlord, or if you're in a month-to-month situation, you definitely want to make sure you have a plan, because it might be a perfect time to leverage the conditions now to relocate, get into a new long-term home, rather than looking back 1, 2, 3 years later when the economy's roaring back, right? And you may have looked back to say, shoot, I wish I had at least dipped my toe in the water to see, right, what I could have got from my existing landlord, or what that landlord in that nice new plaza down the street would be offering to me. So how do we structure this? Well, here's a great example. And again, we have lots, but in the essence of time, we'll fly through this. This is the option to renew. This is found in 90% of dental office leases. So take a quick moment and try to look through all the potential, or the first few issues that you might see as a red flag. I got quick on the button there. So first of all, a couple of things. Number one is look out for, if in your lease agreement today, it is that provided Dr. your name, Joe Black, shall remain as the tenant, and if the duly and regularly has paid its rent and outperformed its covenants and obligations under the lease and it's not been held default. So two issues here. Number one, it's personal to you. If you go to sell, Bank of America or other banks, if you have insufficient term on your lease, right? If you've got 1 or 2 or 3 years left on the lease, right? The banks typically will not issue a loan, right, for that term. They want to have the predictability and continuity of revenue. So leasing issues can impact the ability to get financing. And number two is default. What a lot of doctors unfortunately did incorrectly through the COVID times, this time last year, was a few things. Number one was making alterations to the space without the landlord's prior written consent, number one. That could put you in a default situation, and they may or may not even have to tell you. Number two, the landlord might have said, you know what, hey, pay me when you can, you know what, pay me, 3 months in the end. If that wasn't properly documented, right, and done as a specific amendment, then technically your lease is as it stands. So that could be a significant issue that could impact your ability, if held in default, your ability to stay, your ability to renew your lease, or potentially even an ability to sell. Another interesting one is that landlords may have asked for your financial statements. You went to them to ask for help. The landlord said, sure, but send me your financials. You said, whoa, I don't think so. Right? I don't want my landlord to see how well my year was last in 2019 and suddenly didn't send it back. But for many of you within your lease, Article 82, 26, whatever it may be, is that you had a responsibility to send it to the landlord within 5 or 10 business days or to be held in default. A lot of other issues through here. Again, in the essence of time, right, there's a lot of things that you want to be very aware of through your lease. And even the smallest of things, again, could have the impact of tens or hundreds of thousands of dollars of mistakes. This was a prime example. This was a doctor who had reached out to us. His friend was, or what he thought was his friend, was the landlord who did everything right, but just happened to miss his option to renew deadline. And this landlord wrote him this lovely letter that says, you missed it, right? Which you did not do. So I'm sending my broker out today to put a for lease sign in your window in a conspicuous but non-intrusive place in your window, right? Of course, in the bottom, we can still reach an agreement if you'd like, but please feel free to have your broker call my broker. Unbelievable, right? So suddenly now we have the situation where the doctor is in a pretty precarious situation and the landlord can put all new paper, rates, terms right in front of them. So as I pass it over to David in a moment, really a couple of core components that you should be very aware of. Of course, we talked a little bit about the pandemic language. Very rarely are landlords willing to add COVID type language to it. But for new starts, there is some flexibility there as it pertains to termination or otherwise. Alterations, we discussed fixturing, continuous operation. Some doctors got held in default notices, received default notices because of the fact that they weren't open for that pure period of time as the lockdown occurred. Demolition and relocation. Many practice brokerages in the continent, some will use a discounted cash flow measure. And for some, I can think of one in Canada, for example, that if you have a demolition right that occurs in 1 or 2 years from now, they will assess a $250 fee per square foot of a cost that would be factored in and reducing the total value of your practice upon sale because of that demolition clause, right? Meaning that it's a liability that your buyer would have. That is a major risk. In the essence, one other component here, death and disability. All the things we never thought would happen to us in COVID happened. Therefore, top of mind, please, doctors, across the board, make sure that in your next lease renewal negotiation, ensure that you have dental specific language, specifically a death and disability clause. That means, heaven forbid, something were to happen to you or your ability to practice wet finger dentistry, right? You need to be protected, either to prevent you being in default because you are no longer there, or to give your estate the ability to renew the lease in preparation for sale, or again, if you're incapacitated, the ability to terminate the lease with a 3 or 6 month termination notice. Death and disability clause can be very, very important, especially in these times. Also, personal guarantees. A lot of doctors thinking of walking away say, well, hang on a second, what do you mean I'm on the hook personally? What do you mean the landlord can come after my personal assets? What do you mean that as a result, I would have to return it to pre-dental condition on my exit? So these are just a few components that if you're not sure, there'll be an option here shortly through the poll to request a lease rental rate analysis and a lease review to ensure, as a lot of people are screenshotting, to ensure that you're aware of what's included, what's not, to ensure that you are protected and avoiding some of those risks before it comes up to bite you. In addition, as we wrap, start the process early. The old lease negotiation handbook is out the window because of the impact of COVID. You have more leverage, but don't stop, don't wait, and don't fall into the landlord's trap, which is what you're seeing on your screen, which is landlords that will delay, defer, and wait as long as possible, knowing that the longer they wait, typically, the less options you have. So start to be proactive and have that. So just to summarize, number one, get all the information. If you do not have an executed, meaning signed and countersigned copy of your agreement with the landlord, then it's not worth the paper it's written on. You can easily email your landlord and say, please send me a digital copy of my lease, and they'll send it back to you very quickly. That's typical for tax purposes or some of the programs last year, PPP or otherwise. Identify your goals, right? Evaluate your lease for risks, get all the data in terms of market rate analysis, and determine your end goal. It's a carefully choreographed game of chess that we do every day. But at this point, what have we not done? We've gone from 1 to number 5. We have yet to pick up the phone and call the landlord. Right? What so many doctors do, and please don't do this after the event, is to pick up the phone and to say, hey, my lease is coming up in 2 years, Mr. Landlord. Hey, let's start talking about the renewal. Right? If you're reactive, that could certainly decrease some of your leverage. Much better to go through the process, to have it reviewed, determine your goals, determine the end game long before entertaining connecting with the landlord. Don't forget, this is all they do, all day, every day. The Lord of the land, one of the world's oldest professions. So in appreciation of everyone's time, our lease review service is a $19.95 value, $1,995, where we spend multiple hours with myself and my team analyzing the lease for traps. We schedule at least a 1-hour call to go through in detail to help analyze where some of the risks are, review some of the financial comparisons in your specific area, and to help determine what that ideal end result would look like. So from that perspective, I'll open it up to some of my panelists here. As a reminder, right, to the well over 100 people on the event tonight, you're not alone. Right? Make sure that you are valuing your time and to help ensure that you're getting the best possible guidance before entering into these situations. And especially for those that are 6 months out or heaven forbid in a month-to-month situation, as we pull up a poll here, make sure to denote that it's urgent. We will prioritize those. The last few events we've had 50, 60, 70 doctors requesting for some key assistance. So number one question, are you with a lease today? That could also be applicable if you own, right? And if you have a lease structured. Number two, to help assess your leverage, when does your current lease expire? It's already expired next 2 years, within the next 2 years, 5 years, right? I own the building, right? Or I don't have a lease today. Number three is your situation urgent? Yes, no, or not sure? Right. And then last but not least, I would strongly encourage that as a benefit of your time, we waive the $2,000 fees, right? And certainly we'll follow up to schedule the lease review to make sure you're aware, if nothing else, aware of some of the main red flags and risks hidden within your lease. Perfect. As we let the group update and update those particular polls, David, Adrienne, any perspectives that you've seen with your clients across in terms of the lease and post-COVID world of lease negotiations?
You know, Eric, I always see the dentist trying to negotiate their own lease as very much a David versus Goliath kind of thing. I mean, they're playing in somebody else's turf and the landlord has all the advantages. And I am so glad that there is Cirrus to level that playing field. You know, you're just a fantastic resource for these people. And occupancy is normally one of their highest line items in terms of cost. you know, so how can we make sure that we get the value and also don't kind of paint ourselves into a corner?
Well, I will absolutely agree 100% with you, David. The thing about it is, you know, this is the type of thing that dentists aren't getting in their dental curriculum. They don't know how to negotiate leases and, you know, do all that. Just like with HR and the embezzlement stuff, they don't know. They need to have people like Cirrus in their back pocket to step in and handle stuff like that. And I wholeheartedly agree with you, David. It's great to have Cirrus as a tool to be able to step in and help. And I would not want to be on the hook as being in a lease without having somebody like Cirrus to look over my shoulder and kind of guide me along. That's for sure.
Absolutely.
Certainly, we appreciate it. Again, you saw my phone line that was up there previously. Any particular urgent calls, I usually get 3 or 4 after each webinar. I'm usually up late in the evening to help answer, and anybody that has some specific concerns and urgency, happy to help out, or again, emailing us at the info at. Again, it is my pleasure to introduce, last but certainly not least, and I am amazed how quickly I got through all my content here. David Harris, lots of time for David again, lots of questions. The vast majority, very interesting that the vast majority of you, over 50%, have had embezzlement issues or aware of someone that have been embezzled. And just as a reminder, the Q&A section, lots of questions have been coming in for all the panelists. We will be doing a full section at the end, but please feel free to continue to pose those up either anonymously or otherwise, and we'll help to cover those towards the end. All right, without further ado, Mr. Harris.
Thanks, Eric. I'm so honored to share the podium tonight with, first of all, 2 people I really like, but beyond that, what we have in common is that we're all hyper specialized. I mean, Eric and Adrienne have narrow focuses. You know, there are consulting companies out there that do 5 other things for dentists, and we also help with HR. Ben Ericksen is laser focused. Certainly Cirrus Group is, and I'd like to think that we are as well. So I'm going to talk to you about those bad people who want to steal your money. And it's interesting because the result of that poll, and Eric just mentioned it a minute ago, came very close to other numbers that we have, and I'm going to put them up. So in 2019, so this is obviously a pre-COVID survey, the American Dental Association asked about 17,000 dentists, have you been stolen from? Well, one of the interesting things about polls on embezzlement is that you don't get a lot of definitive answers. So the first answer came when 53% said, as far as I know, I haven't been. So you can all do the math. The other 47% were stolen from, and again, very close to our poll numbers. For those 47% who said yes, the American Dental Association asked a follow-up question. And the follow-up question was, how many times? So 26%, roughly half of those who had been embezzled, said once, as far as I know. 11% said twice. 2% were 3-time victims, and then a whopping 8% were stolen from 4 or more times. So if you just do a little bit of simple math here, and you take 26% times 1, and 11% times 2, and 2% times 3, and so on, what you come up with is that if you put 100 dentists in a room, there have been 93 embezzlements committed against them in total. So that's a lot. And I haven't dropped the worst piece of news yet. The ADA did a similar study in 2007. So this was 12 years earlier. And when they did, at that point, 35% of dentists reported being embezzled. So in a 12-year period, the percent of dentists who had been embezzled went up by 12 percentage points, or about one third. So this is a growth industry. In case that wasn't bad enough news, let me give you a little more. And if you have Ativan around, now would probably be a good time. On average, when you're stolen from, it's going to last undetected for almost 2 years. thieves all understand the concept of diversifying their portfolio, and almost every thief I've encountered steals from you 3 different ways at once. And the amount that the average thief gets to the point where they get caught is about $109,000. So this is well beyond something that was topical a year ago, which was toilet paper disappearing from your staff restaurant. There are small thefts and there are big thefts and there are really big thefts. And just to save somebody asking me this in the Q&A box, the biggest one I've ever seen was just about $2 million. In fact, we're wrapping up a $2 million activity right about now. So let's ask a really basic question. Why do people steal? And I guess the short answer is because they can, but the motivating factors are need or greed. And needy thieves are exactly what it sounds like. You know, there's some kind of financial upset that's happening in their life, and there's more money leaving their household each month than what's coming in. And you can sustain that for a little while, but eventually you can't. So these people are stealing to buy groceries and make the mortgage payments and kind of defend the basics of their life. And one thing I'll say about COVID, and Adrienne was talking earlier on about, you know, job losses and displacement in the economy and stuff, and it has created some more needy people. And then you have greedy thieves, and they're a little bit different. These people steal to address an ego deficit more than a financial one. And they love the money they steal, but that's not primarily why they do it. They feel underappreciated by society. In fact, a lot of them really look at you as kind of a high functioning moron with good hands. And in their mind, the only reason that you are successful is because I keep your chair full. And when patients leave, I collect the money. So a lot of them kind of almost construct this partnership between you and them that exists nowhere other than in their mind. And they're taking what they think you should be giving them. When I say money is not necessarily the motivator, here's what I'm talking about. One of our alumni, as I lovingly call them, was embezzling, and then she won $3 million in the state lottery. So you can picture what would happen if most of your staff won $3 million in the lottery. They would tear up that nice job description that Adrienne gave you. They would walk out the door, and on the way out, they would say that thing that they've always wanted to say to you and never had the courage to do before. And it usually relates to sex and travel in the same phrase. This woman did none of those things. She kept working and she kept stealing. And here's the instructive part. The amount of money that she was stealing each month after she won the $3 million went up. She was stealing more as a millionaire than she was before. So greedy people love the money they steal, but it's not why they do it. So I'm going to let you in here on one of the secrets of the universe. And it's how embezzlers approach the world. And they start by asking a really basic question. When the money that the practice collects goes into the practice's bank account, does the doctor know and check how much money the deposit should have been? And if the answer to that question is no, and I'm going to gently say that that's probably the case in 80% of practices, then what that means is that I can steal without any need to do anything exotic in your practice management software. I can simply siphon off some of the deposit and you won't know. What some doctors do is what I think of as incomplete supervision. And what that means is they look at what I think of as the physical deposit, like cash and checks. But the stuff that arrives invisibly in your bank account, like EFTs from insurance companies, or if you work with somebody like Care Credit that deposits directly into your account, most dentists tend to forget about that stuff because it's kind of out of sight, out of mind. So if that's the case, then what thieves do is they misclassify. You know, patient comes in and pays by check, they steal the check, they go cash it, and in your practice management software, they tell you it was a credit card payment. So the reconciliation has to be total. It can't be a partial one because you'll get burnt. If I'm stealing from you and I decide that that will not work for me, then what I need to do instead is I need to teach your PMS here means practice management software, not the other thing. I need to teach your practice management software how to lie. In the interest of time and security, I'm not going to do that here. But what I will tell you is it's not hard. We see software manipulated every single day. So you have a practice and the amount that comes in today is $12,200. If I can find a way to make your fancy EagleSoft say that it was $11,800 that came in, then I can steal your money. And I hinted at something a second ago, but let me make it explicit. It happened to me today. I was talking to a doctor from Washington State, and we were talking about embezzlement. And the first thing she said to me was, I don't take in much cash. And what she was trying to say is, I'm safe. And I said, do you have any idea how easy it is for somebody to cash a check with your name on it? And she didn't have any idea. So I said, okay, I want you to do a little experiment tonight. When you go home, write a check to your husband, but don't put his name on it. Put Mickey Mouse. Make it for $500 and sign it Daffy Duck. Tell him, don't go to a teller. Either take a picture of it with your smartphone to deposit it or put it in an ATM. And you know what? Nobody's going to call you and say, you know, you guys might want to stay away from Anaheim for a little while. It is ridiculously easy to cash a check with your name on it or to intercept a credit card payment. So we've got to think beyond $20 bills here. So how do we outsmart these people? Well, I think there are a number of components, but I'm really going to highlight three here. And the first thing, and we're going to circle back to what Adrienne was talking about a little while ago, we need to know a lot more about the people we hire than most dentists do most of the time. Most dentists do with hiring like what they do with their leases. They make their decisions based on incomplete information. And the irony is, in both cases, there's often better information available if you just knew where to get it. The second thing that's got to happen is you need to know how much money should have gone in your bank account, and that needs to be verified.
I believe David just froze for a quick moment. See if he can rejoin in just a moment. Adrienne, on that point, from an HR perspective and from a compliance perspective, obviously now that the room is certainly pretty concerned based on these type of things happening. Yeah. From an HR perspective or proactive perspective, can you touch on some key things that, again, our group can explore?
Yeah, as David was saying, making sure that you're checking the information that you have. That was one of the things that I pounded on, was that those references, check those references, make sure that you're talking to somebody that is actually an authorized person. You know, we say talk to the dentist that they worked for before, or the boss that they had before. There are times that people, oh, David's back.
There's your classic technical glitch. And the irony was I had my second computer set up and running and everything was working so well, so I shut it down.
That was your problem right there.
Yeah, all right. Well, let me see if I can get back to the slide where I was. Sorry about that, gang.
Well, I'm just going to finish my thought, David, while you do that real quickly. Checking the references, making sure that you're talking to the person and not that they've given you a fake phone number and you're talking to a friend of theirs or somebody else. But doing those reference checks, you have to do that. You absolutely
just hold that thought for a minute, Adrienne, because I'll be right there in a second.
Okay.
So if you don't reconcile, you are opening the door to the least industrious, least intellectual thief on the planet. If you reconcile properly, then you keep out that bottom quartile from stealing from you, and that's relatively easy. And the third thing we need to do is we need to know what it looks like when somebody's acting like they're stealing, and I'm going to talk about that in a minute. So Adrienne was pretty impatient, so let's get to her vital thing here. I should be grateful for her pinch hitting for me for a minute.
I was just filling the gap, David.
Awesome.
Go ahead.
Admirable. I'm only sad that I missed it. The first thing you need to do when you're interviewing somebody is check their photo ID, because one of the truisms here is that you can investigate the crap out of somebody, but if you're investigating the wrong person, it's a total waste. So when you're interviewing somebody, I want you to check their photo ID and a couple of secondary pieces of ID, you know, gym membership card, library card, student card, Costco membership, whatever. The only thing you should ask them to do is to place their thumb or a Post-it note over information that would be discriminatory, like their birth date. Okay, we have to do that part, but we've got to check that photo ID. If you don't do it at the interview stage, you run the risk of, as I say, investigating the heck out of the wrong person. Adrienne mentioned references, and I'm going to suggest a little terminology change here. A lot of times when people talk about checking references, they're talking about character references. Character references are useless here. I do not give a flying donut what somebody's high school basketball coach thinks of them, or their parish priest. The only people worth talking to are former employers, and your rule should be very simple. We need to talk to everybody they've worked for in the past 5 years. And now what Adrienne said is bang on. Do not call any phone number given to you by an applicant. If somebody says they worked for Dr. Susie Smith in Walla Walla, Washington, go online, Google's really cheap to use, find the phone number, and then you know who you're speaking with. Similarly, do not give any value whatsoever to any written reference letter. Any employee worth their salt on, you know, when they think they're about to get fired, they grab some letterhead so that they can make their own reference letter and give it to their next employer. Okay, written stuff worth nothing. It astounds me, it absolutely astounds me that dentists hire people without drug testing them. You know, I can't get a job with any major employer. I mean, I can't get a job with FedEx delivering all the crap people buy on Amazon without having a drug test. And yet I can probably work in your practice. And you may not know this about Amazon or for that matter, FedEx, but they don't have prescription pads in every vehicle. I mean, you are bringing people into an environment where they can prescribe or where prescription is possible and it's easy to abuse. So let's check. If somebody is working in a credentialed position, so they're an associate or a dental assistant or a hygienist, we need to verify credentials. And same thing, we can't rely on a piece of paper. I don't hire anybody without looking at their social networking, because to me, it's a great way to see how they interact with other people unfiltered. We'll see a lot of things here that could concern us: high-risk lifestyle, just even the basic way they communicate with people. We had one of our dentists who got a call from an endodontist who said, you might want to have a look at some of the stuff your front desk person's sending out. I mean, she was typing referral letters to the endodontist, and it was like she was sending text messages. So she'd use the letter U instead of YOU and that kind of stuff. And those things are readily observable if you look at somebody's social networking activity. Again, you've got to deal with some privacy issues and potentially some discrimination issues, but there are good ways to handle that stuff. And the final, and by no means least, is the criminal records check. I'm going to give you a really sobering statistic: 70 million Americans. So that is 1 in 4 adults has a criminal record. Not all of those criminal records would necessarily stop me from hiring somebody. I mean, if I was hiring somebody in California who had a conviction for a marijuana possession 20 years ago, and you all know that marijuana is currently legal in California, you know, that probably wouldn't bother me. On the other hand, check fraud 3 years ago, that's an absolute showstopper. So these are the things that I think you need to check before you hire somebody, and you're free to compare this to your own process and see if it's deficient. As Adrienne said, hiring is not fun and it's a lot of work, but the cost of a bad hire, especially one who steals from you, can be astronomical. And we see these people called serial embezzlers. And a serial embezzler is somebody who gets fired at one practice for stealing. Or, you know, maybe it's the hygienist who uses the same Profi cup for the whole day. And 2 weeks later, magically, they're working more or less across the street. And we all sit there and wonder how it happened. Well, it happened because people don't do this. Now, we shouldn't play applicant survivor here. In other words, the idea is not to drug test 10 applicants and hire the one with the least stuff in their system. Normally what happens here is you get down to the one person you want to hire, and then you start implementing this stuff. You know, to call former employers on 5 applicants would be a heck of a lot of work. So normally I'd say get down to 1 and then and then make sure you know what you're getting. I talked about reconciliation, and I'm just going to lay out a few quick things to do. The first thing is this: the reports that you use at the end of the day, at the end of the month, should be ones that you printed yourself. As soon as you allow a staff member to print and hand you a report, you have abdicated control over the assumptions from that report. And what you create is the possibility of what's called selective reporting. We're just looking at a case right now where receivables kind of got out of control in a practice. And the office manager was trying to hide this from the doctor. So she was giving him reports that showed the receivables at around $250,000, which was bad. We went in and printed a report, $680,000. Okay. She was selectively reporting. I know some of you would love to go through your whole life without learning the first thing about your practice management software. I guess what I have to tell you is it's as important to your financial well-being as your handpiece. And you have to embrace it in that spirit. I talked about the reconciliation. You don't have to do this. A bookkeeper, an accountant, your spouse, if they're interested and able, if you have a kid in college and business school, somebody else can do this for you. You don't have to do it, but it has to happen. And 3 things I want you to do on a monthly basis. The first is your alarm company logs when people come and go from your practice. They will happily send you a copy of that log. And the 3 or 4 minutes it takes you to look at it to see if anybody's coming in at weird hours are some of the best time you can spend monitoring your practice. Thieves want to be alone when they steal, and that means they'll come in early or they'll stay late or they'll kind of slide into the office on Saturdays. 2 important reports: your receivables report, which tells how much patients owe the practice, and what's called the insurance aging report. And that shows insurance claims that haven't been paid. And a lot of times when a doctor has a money problem, that report is kind of at the core. The final thing I'll say is anybody who sends you a statement, get it sent to your house and not the practice. If it's an electronic statement being sent, it should go to your email address and not your office manager or your financial coordinator. You need to be the first person to see reports and forward them on to other people. Let's talk about warning signs. And I touched on this one already. Thieves want to be by themselves when they steal. Not always, it depends on the pattern, but a lot of thieves don't like to take vacation. When they're gone, they lose control over how information flows to the office. And a patient phoning to complain about their bill, which sometimes is a symptom of embezzlement, will suddenly come to the doctor's attention, where if the office manager wasn't on vacation, he or she would have just dealt with it. So you can see vacation reluctance. This one is probably the most pervasive of any of the symptoms I'm going to give you. These people are possessive about their duties. It will often even extend to their work area, their computer. You know, this is the person who will get mad if somebody else sits at their desk or touches their computer. Thieves typically don't want to cross-train anybody else to do any part of their job, because that creates the potential for their job to be broken up. And stealing often thrives when somebody has a lot of control over a lot of different areas. The word that really strikes terror into the heart of most thieves is consultant. They know they can fool you. You're under their spell. You're the person, the thief is the person who makes your life easiest. You have already thought that, I would be so screwed if she ever left. When somebody comes into the practice who thinks about healthcare as a business more than a healing art and isn't under your spell, that's danger for a thief. And they'll try very hard to keep these people away from you. This is the person who cuts ethical corners. If you and I are walking down the street and we see somebody's wallet fall out of their pants 50 feet in front of us, probably without giving it much thought, we'll scoop down, pick up the wallet, and walk a little faster to catch up with them and say, here, you dropped your wallet. A thief may do that too, but they get there via a little different process. They ask themselves a couple of questions that you or I might not, like, I wonder if anybody else saw that wallet fall, and I wonder how much money's in it. And their overt action might end up being the same, but they got there a different way. And the final thing I'll say is that honest people do not have to continually reinforce with you how honest they're being. When somebody tells you or shows you repeatedly how honest they are, they're trying to convince themselves and you. And that's a really good sign of dishonesty. All right, final slide before we bring my co-host back in and take some of your questions. Let's say you get to the point today, tomorrow, or next year when you think one of your staff members might be stealing from you. The most important thing, the absolute most important consideration is do not let that person know that they're under suspicion. You know, if I've been stealing from you and I think I'm about to get caught, and I think that my getting caught will mean that I go to jail, the list of things that I will not do to prevent that's pretty short. And the couple on the screen kind of epitomize this. The lady on your right is named Shante Joyner Hickman. She worked for a dentist in Maryland named Dr. Albert Rowe. She was stealing from Dr. Rowe and she thought she was going to get caught. So she came back to the practice one night when she knew Dr. Rowe would be there catching up on his paperwork. She brought her cousin Dante Jeter, he's on your left, with her for some muscle. And the two of them dragged Dr. Rowe into the patient restroom and beat him to death. And I probably don't need to make that story any worse, but I'm going to anyway. The amount that was stolen was $17,000. And for that, the two model citizens on your screen got aggregate prison terms of 40 years, and Dr. Rowe's family got him home in a box. So if you suspect, if you have concerns, if you wake up one morning and you say things aren't right, that's the moment you need expert help. You know, this is a crime scene, potentially, and stumbling into it is just a really bad idea. That was kind of fast and furious. There's some of my team. You probably know this, like my colleagues here, we confine ourselves to a very narrow field and we only work with dentistry. All of my team have a dental background. About 40% of our investigators used to be or still are dentists, and the rest have some other kind of dental background. We are always happy to chat. If you have concerns, pick up the phone and give me a call, by all means. Thank you very much. Sorry about my little computer hiccup in the middle. I thought I was so prepared for that. I'll welcome Adrienne and Eric back in case there's anything they want to discuss on my presentation.
Oh my gosh, David, that was amazing. That was awesome. It's absolutely sickening to hear like the last example that you gave of the dentist being killed. And I totally agree. I can't tell you how many times when I was managing that I would see the serial embezzler.
Yeah.
And in this particular instance, she would go from practice to practice and, you know, nobody was calling on references and she was just allowed to continue to do it. So it's such a crime to see these dentists work so hard to build their practice and then have someone come in and just take it out from under their noses. So gosh, you guys offer such a valuable service.
And it's not, you know, you can talk about the dollars, Adrienne, and the financial damage. You know, dental offices are small places. People there get pretty close. You know, there's a little bit of shared misery sometimes that draws people together. And, you know, a lot of dentists feel emotionally violated when somebody takes that trust and leverages it and uses it against them.
Yeah, because like you said, it's been a trusted employee. They've attended birthday parties for their kids. They've graduation, weddings, and they've become family members. And so
a comment I get a whole lot is, you know, gosh, I was at her daughter's wedding 3 months ago.
Exactly.
And I'm just starting to realize how much of it I really paid for.
Sad, but true.
It is.
It's, I think my takeaway, David, from our original webinar we did a couple of years ago and events we've done together, I did the same, right? Credit card statements and otherwise and changed. And it's the small things. And I think, you know, again, for all of you here, we're going to do a Q&A section here. Lots of Q&As through. Feel free to add them in as we go. And certainly we'll see the polling question come up here now. Again, from that perspective, for those of you looking for help from David or David's team, you're right. Don't walk into a crime scene. If you've got a suspicion, have a quick call with David and his team. They're incredible at what they do. So that was number one for a yes, no. Number two, for those of you that might have missed it, again, for those of you that are concerned or similarly, right, just like dealing with embezzlement or troubled employees or all the type of things that they've never taught in dental school, is suddenly now, as you realize, as a business owner, is suddenly now fully your responsibility. And don't let that, the love for the craft or the fact that you're just so busy chairside, don't, in essence, no one loves reading a lease, except for my team, and they read them all day, right? Nobody loves forensic accounting, except for
Good life, Eric.
Hey, I got 2 young kids. I have no life. Nobody loves the HR side, except, right, Adrienne. So my point of this is, again, you're not alone in all of this. You have a fantastic group of individuals and hyper specialized dental firms. It's worth it. And again, the benefit of it is because of our firm's history and otherwise, to help ensure that even just, again, complimentary calls and appreciation of that, it's worth the time. I will personally, whatever, usually it's 5 or 6 calls afterwards, whatever it takes to make sure that your situation is heard, right? We review the documents, David to walk through on the embezzlement side, and certainly to look through some of the practices of, hey, I might have shared the admin password with the practice management software or something of that nature, right? These type of things that you might be now thinking, could this be a concern, right? A quick phone call to David and his team could be key. Or, you know what, I've got one, office manager, she's been with me for 30 years. And you know what, she's sort of been resistant to getting a new employment contract in place. Perfect call for, as Adrienne's eyes widen, perfect opportunity to have a quick phone call with our teams. So again, as business owners to business owners, we certainly understand the challenges and frustrations and how important that revenue is. And hopefully from today, you've now seen 3 major areas to focus on the financial health of your business. Let that be your lease, let that be with your employees, let that be with your financial management and protecting those costs. So again, we'll jump into questions now. For those of you that haven't filled out the poll, we'll close that in just a second, but we'll keep this open for as long as possible and help to run into some of these key questions. And again, this is something that I've been looking forward to now for about 2 years, when we were, again, in a car together doing some lectures and wanting to do this as a 3-way trifecta. And hopefully we can do this in person one day soon. So first question.
I think he just called this a threesome, but I'm not sure.
We'll go with it. It's okay.
Did you notice I separated between David and HR? If we just separated.
I'm not famous for being politically correct. I should just say that up front.
Oh, geez. Now, is this at least in person? There's wine. There's other stuff. We really should have some more.
Oh, this is cold turkey.
Yeah, exactly. So still well over 100 here. So just quickly, Adrienne, first question for you: how do we handle an employee that says that she was out for COVID for 6 weeks last year? Are there any state or federal programs that cover COVID sick pay? And what are the rules? Is she covered for the entire time? We're a small practice with 20 people or less.
Well, she would have been last year when the required payments were in effect. There was a 2-week sick pay that was required up to 80 hours. And then there is a 10-week emergency family medical leave that would have been in place. As of December 31st of 2020, the requirement went away for that. The government did extend the tax credit availability for an employer until March 31st, and then they extended it again voluntarily until September the 30th. But anything that happened in 2020 and that wasn't recorded as FFCRA or, COVID responsibility back then, I'm not sure that they would be able to go back and get any type of tax credit for that at this point. I think the door is probably closed on that. I think the best thing would be to do for them to check with their accountant, check with your accountant and see if the accountant thinks that you might be able to go back. I seriously doubt that the government will allow you to claim that this far down the road. But certainly anything that happens now until September the 30th, there is voluntary tax payroll credit that you can use for that.
Perfect. Again, we're answering these live, so feel free for everyone else through here, post any questions to the Q&A function, not the chat, and we'll get to those here shortly. Another question similar to what I had asked earlier, Adrienne, which was, how do you implement an employee agreement for an established employee, or maybe a new employee, a new established employee?
Yeah, I think sometimes we tend to think that, and it's true, sometimes the employee will become offended if all of a sudden you ask them to sign an employment agreement and they've been in the practice for a long time. It's very easy for you to explain that as, when you know better, you do better. Your HR advisors have told you that this is the best way to keep everything clean and communication clear, and it's not a matter that you distrust them. It's just for documentation purposes, you need to get that in place. So it's not a slap on the wrist that they've done anything wrong. It's clearly for you as a business owner, you're trying to make sure that the documentation is there. So
if I can add one thing, if you're talking about existing employees,
yeah,
it's really important not to use this as an opportunity to try to shift your position relative to the employee. I mean, in that case, the employment agreement should really document what's there now.
oh, absolutely.
And not, because sometimes somebody will get a hold of it and say, well, we should do this and we should do that and we should do the third thing. And then you're throwing a bunch of changes at the employee. And of course, they're going to put, not in their favor. And of course, they're going to push back.
Yeah, and that's a totally separate discussion, that if you're changing something, that's not on the table when you're talking about an employment agreement, that they've been there performing a specific duty at a specific compensation level. That's a whole different conversation.
Yeah.
Great. Perfect. Next one, which is for me, the question was skewed towards a practice that isn't owned by the doctor. What is the situation where I rent from a realty corp that is owned by my wife and I personally? So yes, doctor, we covered that a tiny bit at the beginning, but especially with COVID, there's really four main reasons why it's critical to have a lease that separates your corp that owns the practice, right, from the corp that owns the building. Number one is obviously from a proper taxation or audit perspective. If you're inflating, right, paying more in rent or less in rent to overinflate one profit for the other, that's certainly going to be a red flag for the IRS or otherwise. So making sure that's based on fair and market rates and that you can document that is certainly very important. Number two, from a liability perspective, right? For example, who is responsible for what as it pertains to the space? And that can be important, especially as you mentioned. Let's say that you bring on a partner or an associate in the future, and then your realty corp is co-owned with your spouse. Well, suddenly, if you pass away, heaven forbid, now you've got a situation where your wife is now dealing with the associate who's a minority shareholder, and now suddenly you've got a big rift between the two because now you're not there, there's no lease in place, and suddenly, right, you've created a bit of a mess. So ask yourself, what is the state of your estate? Another big one, especially because of COVID, is that the value of the practice and the building. Again, very important those leases are in there. If you're using the same credit card to buy a faucet or fix the roof as you are to buy a handpiece from Henry Schein, those particular differences make it almost impossible when you go to sell and you want to maintain ownership and be a landlord and get that passive form of income. It becomes very difficult to then properly value the practice because they're just melded in terms of financials. So again, if you were to pass away or heaven forbid something were to happen, then that lease really does clearly give you a clear runway, or even better, when you go to sell in 5 or 10 or 15 years, look, this is the lease I've had. I'm just assigning you my lease. How great would that be from a buyer's perspective to say, well, hey, if this was good enough for the doctor, it must be good enough for me. Right? But again, it's going from one pocket to the other. But especially with COVID, especially those that think that there's a 1% chance that they want to maintain ownership of the building and sell the practice separately, right? It is, if the ink is still wet, that's a major red flag from a due diligence perspective from a future buyer. Great. Hopefully that answered that one. Another key question here about a landlord dentist. So you're a dentist, you lease to yourself and you lease to another dentist, and therefore do we assist in those type of situations? So it depends. So definitely happy to follow up with that individually, but typically if we've, again, to assist a dentist, for example, if they want to design something in preparation for sale and they want to make sure they've got the right lease in place and to make sure that they've got themselves protected not only through now, but eventually when they sell and become a landlord, yes. So happy to circle back with you on that as well. Next question, just in chronological order here. For myself as the unit owner, what type of lease documentation should we have? Does Cirrus prepare that? Yes, we do a lease creation advisory service. So we're happy to help structure that with all the real estate reports, etc. It's a lease negotiation without the negotiation. So yes, very important to have that in place, especially from, I'm sure your accountants would be happy with that as well. Next question. So David or potentially Adrienne, question about drug testing. Who is responsible for paying for the drug test, you or the candidate?
It should be the employer. You know, you also want to own the results, and if somebody else pays for them, then they own the results. Normally what happens, Eric, is the employer arranges this. So typically there's a lab in any decent sized city that will do drug testing for you. You normally get the employee to, or get the applicant to do it on fairly short notice, like 48 hours is plenty of time. You don't want to give them a week to try to clean out whatever the heck's in their system. And bear in mind that you're probably only going to test one person. In other words, again, it's not where we play applicant survivor and pay for drug tests on 10 people. We get down to one, and if they fail the drug test, then maybe you'll be testing a second person. But there shouldn't be there shouldn't be 5 drug tests done in your practice.
And I will chime in on that also. If you're requiring the test, then you should be paying for it.
Yeah.
Another technology question, David, not about logging in and out of Zoom, but from the app, a lot of the Chase apps, Bank of America apps, etc. They've got those proactive notifications that you can go in and basically send yourself a push notification for anything over $1. Let that be cash in or cash out. Any advice for doctors specifically that maybe that's an easy way that, again, as they're busy throughout the course of the day, let it be, if they don't have time to log into their banking software from their phone, or to set up some of those proactive push notifications. I know I do that personally. Any suggestions on that for the corporation and the business?
I think, knowing most dentists the way I do, those notifications are going to drive them crazy. And to me, Eric, the reconciliation process is best done by an external bookkeeper. And I should have clarified this earlier. When I say outsource, I mean exactly that. You cannot have your office manager do this. That's like handing the fox the keys to the hen house. It must be somebody who has no access to the practice cash. So we're talking about your CPA firm or an external bookkeeper or something like that. They can do it once a month. One of the challenges in reconciling when you're a dentist is what are called timing differences. So let's think about when a patient comes in today and pays by credit card. And what happens, and this causes doctors fits, is that the practice management software records that payment today, but there's some lag of 2 or 3 days before it hits your bank account. And Adrienne's remembering her days as an office manager and trying to deal with this issue. And when insurance companies make electronic funds transfers, the reverse happens. The money's in the account before the office gets the EOB, because the insurance company puts the EOB in the mail the same time it puts the money in your account. So whatever the postage lag is, shows up the opposite way. So when you're trying to reconcile daily, and staff need to balance at the end of each day, that's an absolute. But when you're trying to oversee the process, you don't have to do it on a daily basis. You can sit down once a month and say, okay, here's the total from Dentrix, here's the total that went into the bank, and let's look at the transactions that are kind of caught across the beginning and the end of the month as timing differences. And when you do it that way, then, you know, stuff like the notifications on the phone, in my mind, just become a lot of noise.
Got it.
Yeah, when I was managing, I had 3 doctors that all had, you know, their separate accounts. And man, David, talk about the lag time between the beginning and the end of the month and reconciling those credit card or the, oh, yeah.
No,
Yeah.
it's, you know, it's horrible. And, you know, I think any dentist is free to say, I didn't go to dental school for 4 years, so I could become a, you know, an undertrained, uncompensated accountant.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a key. Quick follow-up on that. And again, just as a reminder, any additional questions, we'll get to the next few in just a second, but any questions, feel free to post those. What about some of the new, again, on the technology side, perhaps with, there's ePost in Canada, there's USPS that does some digitization that, again, rather than just an envelope showing up at the door and someone opens it and then what do they do with it? Is that part of the strategy at all? So that, again, it goes right from the post office into your digital secure, right?
No.
Okay.
Every time there's a new technology, Eric, it creates additional opportunities for embezzlers. And I'll give you a very simple example. I suspect that most in the audience know what a square is. So this is, I'm not talking about your parents here. This is a little white piece of plastic that plugs into the bottom of a smartphone and reads the magnetic strip on a credit card. So it used to be that to steal credit card payments, what you would do is you'd stick your own credit card in the doctor's machine and process a refund. But that's kind of conspicuous. So what people do now instead is they have their own square, which basically gives them their own merchant terminal in the practice, and the patient hands them a credit card and they take the payment on their own square. So technology has not stopped embezzlement yet. I mean, the ancient Egyptians had embezzlement when they were building the pyramids, and we still have it. And the statistics that I put up a few minutes ago show that certainly in dentistry, it's growing. So technology is not going to solve the problem. It never will. And the problem with technology is that it tends to produce laxity. So when in my brief tenure as an office manager, which was like 30 years ago, in those days, my office took cash and checks. There were no credit card payments. There were no electronic bank deposits. I mean, that concept really barely existed then. So it was simple because you took the whole deposit to the bank. And you could see it, you know, the doctors could see it in front of them, and they could see the total on the old pegboard system and see that one equaled the other. You know, now money flows into a practice in a much more convoluted, complex way. And unfortunately, the systems that we're using to balance are the ones that worked really well in 1989 and not so well in 2021.
Got it. Key point. Another question was, I signed my second 10-year lease, but only plan to practice for another 5 to 7 years. What should I expect, knowing that I'll be looking for prospective buyers, most likely a DSO or IDSO for both my practices? So, Doctor, great question. I would say first, definitely worthwhile making sure that the leases are reviewed. There's a lot of things through the, as David's agreeing, and a lot of the practice brokers have known, or a lot of the big DSOs have found it the hard way, that when there's a change of control, in many cases, more than 51% can require landlord's approval. So let that be if the eventual DSO changes hands or has big private equity investment, or if you were to sell more of the majority share, let it be an asset sale or a share sale, et cetera, then definitely some of the structuring of the assignment is very important. So I don't know what stage, if it's post-signature or otherwise, but definitely happy to have the review the lease and to determine what's there. And definitely there's a lot of leverage, especially if you're looking at another 5 or 10 or 15 years down the road. But to sell, you're right. Think about the properly structured lease as if it's a protective force field around your eventual practice sale proceeds. You want to make sure that the distance from point A to point B is minimized with as minimal bumps in the road. So the landlord, in many cases, through that assignment, could unreasonably withhold, delay, or condition the sale, Or, as I mentioned before, just for asking to sell the practice, the landlord could terminate the lease, right? Just for asking.
Wow.
And in some cases, they can engage directly with your buyer. So ask yourself the question, if you didn't have a lease and the landlord went directly to your buyer to say, hey, look, how much are you going to pay for Dr. Smith's practice? $2 million? Oh my God. Tell you what, I've got a space. I'll only charge you an extra 30% in rent. And now you can just, buy his used amortized gear and whatever's left on the charts. How does that sound? Right. So instantly that can dramatically reduce or eliminate a ton of those practice sale proceeds. And unfortunately, a lot of people haven't heard about these things because at the end of the career, the doctor's embarrassed and so frustrated that you know what, if I got to take another $100,000 haircut on my sale price just to get this thing done, just get it done. And that's $100,000. So don't let a massive sale, right, impact those ability to make those significant changes. Or you've worked too hard for too long, you owe it to yourself, your family, your practice, your patients, not to leave your estate or the business and the sale of the business, right, in wide open. Great. Perfect. So again, in the essence of time, I didn't want to go beyond 9. For those that we didn't get to the questions, we certainly will follow up individually. We thank you for all those filling out the poll questions. I truly cannot thank enough my 2 esteemed colleagues. They are absolutely experts in their field, and you would be crazy not to take them up on the offer to have a conversation with them, just to talk through your specific situation. So Adrienne and David, thank you so much for joining us this evening. We hope to do another one soon. Indiana, maybe something, large, West Coast with Adrienne.
Happen.
We'd love it in the future. Thank you so much again to our hundreds of attendees. We appreciate everyone attending this evening. And thank you very much for everyone's time.
Thank you.
Good night, everybody. Thank
night.
you. Bye.
Thank you.